to today's webinar, Uncovering the True Cost of Mobile Telecommunications. My name is David Goodstein, and I'm the Webinar Coordinator for the Outsourcing Institute. It is our pleasure to be the co-host of today's event with Pomeroy. I'll be working in the background to help answer any technical or general questions that you may have. Before we begin today's session, I'd like to quickly tell you about the questions box. We encourage you at any time to submit your questions to today's speakers. To do so, please submit your questions in the speaker box. Just type your question in the space provided and click the submit button. The webinar is being recorded, and you will be receiving a follow-up email tomorrow with the link to the recorded webinar and presentation slides. Presentation slides and recording will also be available at outsourcing.com. I'd like to quickly tell you about the Outsourcing Institute for those who aren't familiar with us. The Outsourcing Institute is a professional association dedicated to providing independent best practices, tools, roadshow events, and networking opportunities for all forms of outsourcing. Located at outsourcing.com, we have 70,000 members globally. OI specializes in providing low-cost and no-cost alternatives for outsourcing buyers in need of RFP tools, vendor selection assistance, training, as well as general support and coaching. For those of you in this market, we offer an array of very targeted sponsorship and promotional opportunities. Our sister company, CMS, provides recruiting services for those seeking to hire outsourced professionals experienced at buying, selling, managing, or consulting in this arena. Our contact information is at the bottom of the screen for those who have any questions. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to our moderator, Matthew Barlow of Avison, to begin.
Thank you, David. So first of all, I'd like to start off by thanking the Outsourcing Institute and Pomeroy today for bringing us together and bringing together the experts for today's topic. Prior to doing that, let me introduce myself. My name is Matthew Barlow. I'm with Avison. We're a global management consulting and technology firm. Prior to joining Avison, I've certainly dealt with this issue that we're going to talk about. I've led end-user computing practices for companies such as Fox Entertainment Group and Microsoft, including numerous practices across top-tier providers. We're here today to talk about something that's been a consistent challenge to enterprise mobility teams, to technology teams, and that's uncovering the true cost of mobility. And with my background, I certainly understand that problem. That said, Pomeroy's brought together two of their leading experts in mobility to lead these discussions today, and I'll do a quick introduction for both of them. Marty Ezzo, who is the Practice Director for Enterprise Mobility with Pomeroy, has more than 25 years experience in developing, communicating, and executing corporate strategic vision. He has a wealth of experience in information technology, including high-powered systems, teams, implementation of large operation and complex solutions in the area of IT service management, specializing in end-user computing, systems management, data center operations, enterprise mobility, and IT outsourcing. In addition to Marty, we'll also have Joey Davila, who's been in the technology industry for over 19 years. He's been a software developer, project manager, and a technology evangelist. He's developed numerous applications for CD-ROMs, desktops, web, mobile devices, and has done tech evangelism for a number of companies, including OpenCola, Shopify, and Microsoft, where he was the Windows Phone champion. That being said, I'm going to turn it over to Marty to do a quick introduction, and we will jump into our topic.
Thanks, Matt. First, if we'd like to move to the agenda, which is the next slide.
Let me walk us through our topics here as well. So today's agenda, we're going to be covering the innovative use of cellular mobile in the business, telecom cost explosion taking over IT budgets, what is an optimized state for mobility, working towards that optimized state, and we will take some time to go through summary and next steps and go through some questions and answers. So today's discussion will include several polling questions so we can understand the audience perspective and incorporate those perspectives into the discussion. So we'll spend a period of time going over those Q&As as well as going over various points of information around them. And then we'll have an opportunity to open that up, those questions up to yourself.
That's great.
Let's jump to the next slide, and we're going to start off with our first polling question. The first question is, what is the most pressing mobility issue facing your business today? Is it the establishment of BYOD policies and procedures, tracking the number and use of company-provided BYOD devices, procurement, management, and disposal of mobile devices, or more efficiently managing your carrier costs? I'm going to pause for just a moment and allow everyone in the audience to come back and kind of answer some questions.
Well, Matt, when you look at some of the topics here for this first polling question, I think about the first one from a BYOD perspective, and I think about the organizations today that are still struggling to figure out what the right fit is for BYOD from a value risk perspective. And I think it's going to take them quite some time to figure that one out. I mean, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I tend to agree. From a consultant perspective, all of these things can really be a challenge. And the one that personally resonates with me as a person who changes out devices about every 6 months is how do companies manage those policies? And how do you make a policy that's static on a solution that seems to be constantly changing every month? And that one to me personally resonates, but I think a lot of organizations run into all four of these, so I'm curious to see how these come back.
Yeah, definitely. One that's real close is we just recently finished up a migration for one of our clients, and it was amazing to find the number of mobile devices that were sitting in drawers or in cabinets that weren't being used, yet the organization was still spending a monthly amount or paying a monthly carrier invoice on devices that just weren't being used.
Yeah, as I see these answers come back, it appears that what you're saying kind of resonates pretty heavily with the audience. We have about 48% of people just in this audience who say more efficiently managing those carrier costs has been one of the biggest challenges they've run into.
Yeah, it's funny when you look at the questions, especially question B and C, tracking the number and use of company-provided devices or BYOD devices and the procurement, management, and disposal. If organizations just got a handle on those two items in themselves, the last question, which most organizations are struggling with today or see as a challenge in managing carrier costs, they would be well down that path.
Yeah. Well, let's go into and talk a little bit about some of the industry trends in mobility. You want to jump onto that next slide, and we'll kind of go through some information and talking points here?
Yeah, that's great. Thanks, Matt. So if you think about the trends over the last 12 or 24 months from a mobility perspective, it's really not hard to see what's going on, given the fact that from a mobile use perspective, we as individuals, whether we're end users in a company or we're consumers buying products, are driving the adoption of mobile use within organizations. And it comes in different fashions and forms. It doesn't matter whether the device is owned by us or not personally. It doesn't matter what type of device we use or the carriers we're using or how we're using it. It's really all about us as a consumer or the end user, regardless of cost, at least so we think. So what we're seeing is organizations starting to look outside of their four walls for some help. I mean, this is a huge growing problem from a cost perspective as we increase the number of mobile devices per user, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes. So we really need to discover and help organizations understand how they can start to get control over this. So if we move to the next slide, part of the challenge here is mobile use isn't about making phone calls alone anymore or getting your contacts or trading email. As you could see from this slide, we look at some of the industries that are represented here as the movers and shakers when it comes to mobility. These are really the organizations that, in our eyes, have figured out how to deliver business value in the shortest amount of time with the least amount of risk. So, Joey, maybe you could take just a minute or two here and talk about some of the use cases that you're seeing within these industries.
I'd be very happy to, Marty. One of the things to keep in mind, of course, is that phones as we know them, mobile phones as we know them today, are not just phones that happen to be able to run apps, but they're actually pocket-sized computers that happen to be able to make phone calls. These days, the flagship phones, the iPhone 5S, Galaxy S5, to take couple of examples, have about the same computing power as a laptop from a couple of years ago, and that's stunning. And the other thing is they've got better wireless networking than a laptop because they've got both cellular and Wi-Fi. They also have more sensors, not just camera and microphone, but location sensors, GPS, accelerometer, and the magnetometer, the compass thing. Some of the newest devices have weather sensors, temperature, air pressure, and some other new devices have biometric sensors like fingerprint scanners, heart rate monitors. So they are more aware of where they are than your typical desktop computer. And unlike your desktop or laptop computer, mobile devices, most people keep them on their person or within arm's reach most of the time. These qualities have found their way into a number of fields. Some examples include healthcare. You're talking about a workforce that's always on their feet, often running from room to room, and they need info from a number of sources, treatment guides, drug interaction charts, medical dictionaries, to the point where there was a recent survey taken in 2013 in which they found that 1/3 of the physicians who use the most popular app, Hippocrates, use this app 3 times a day. It's amazing how often doctors and nurses now rely on mobile devices as super portable computers. The same things happen in retail. If you've been to the Apple store lately, the cash register is no longer this big thing chained to a desk, but it's now a mobile device, whether it's a tablet or a smartphone with a credit card swipe device, and many retailers are using them. Even street vendors are using mobile devices now as point-of-sale systems. The same computing power and portability you're going to find in manufacturing. If you ever look at stock photography of people working in factories or other manufacturing facilities, you see them carrying clipboards. Wherever you see a clipboard, it's now an opportunity for a mobile device to take over, and in the end, you've got managers keeping watch on assets, labor, inventory, and processes, and shop floor workers streamlining their day-to-day operations by tracking the processes right on the floor. There's a recent survey taken by Motorola saying that mobile applications they have found have saved a daily average of 42 minutes an employee. That's quite a productivity boost.
Yeah, I'd love to do the math on that one.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, the retail one was interesting too. The Apple example, I tell you, it's kind of weird when you walk into an Apple store and you pick your device, your item, and you don't even go through checkout. Almost feel guilty. Feel like somebody's going to stop me on the way out with a beeper going off, and I'm walking out with technology. I shouldn't be.
And you know what? It's also happening at clothing stores and a number of other places.
Well, that's cool. Well, you know what? All of this use really is amazing, but you know, it doesn't come without some serious costs if it's left unmanaged or out of control. So if we move to the next slide, you know, we'll talk a little bit about, you know, what we're seeing, and there's one thing for sure. I mean, this mobile use doesn't come without challenges. So, and just to give you an idea of what those challenges can encompass or how fast they accelerate or escalate, is just imagine every end user having at least 2 to 3 mobile devices each. And they're on their own carrier network of choice, right? They're consuming more data than ever. They're experiencing unchecked roaming costs because there's really nobody that's monitoring this, even though in our global economy today we all have to travel. They're choosing plans and voice and data at their own whim, and there's minimal controls in place from a lifecycle perspective or management related to these choices. So it's not hard to see why something I think Joey's going to share with you in just a second here is so evident to some of the industry analysts. So Joey, you want to talk about some of the data that you've seen related to this explosive opportunity for lack of cost control?
Sure, absolutely. I stumbled across this not too long ago. It's a Gartner report released in January, just a couple of months ago, and they were talking about the projected worldwide IT spending for the year 2014. They were looking at it overall, but since my particular focus is mobility, I zoomed in on something different. In this case, it was that they were predicting the global IT spend of about $3.8 trillion this year. But I noticed that the largest slice of that pie, about $1.7 trillion, 44% of that was on telecom. That is the biggest chunk of the IT budget. That's twice as large as the spending on IT services, 2.5 times as large as the size amount of money you're going to be spending on devices, and 5 times the spend on enterprise software.
Wow.
And the reason pretty much is, you can't do business without communicating. You are talking with coworkers, you're talking with business partners, you're talking with customers. You know what? If you're not talking, you're not making money. That's just that's the way business works. And the interesting thing is now that form of communications isn't just talking. That's also about data and just getting work done. What with distributed workforces, people working on the go, especially your road warriors, work-life balance, where people are trying to find ways to fit their regular life inside a busy workday. There's telecommuting, and all that results in more telecom use and more spending. So yeah, that's basically the picture right there.
That's amazing. I mean, I think about, so these are, from a telecom cost perspective, this is just one aspect of a cost model that is out of control. And today we're just focused on the actual telecom piece of it, but at a later date, I'm sure we'd love to help customers understand the other aspects as well.
Oh yeah.
So if we move to the next slide, please. This chart represents some of the trends that we're seeing, but also some of the challenges that these trends are creating. And we've talked about a few of these earlier in this presentation, but some of the ones that really should resonate with our audience are the overall use of data as it relates to mobile technologies and those rising costs. We all wish that everybody would agree that this is enough and we're not going to charge anymore, but that's just not reality. And then if many of you have worked with multiple carriers in the past, you'll understand the amount of inconsistency that exists between carriers throughout a process, whether you're procuring technology, you're activating it, you're deploying it, you're providing the invoicing around use, and then the reconciliation. Those processes all vary across the carriers, as well as the complexity of the plans and the diversity related to the amount of the types of devices that we're allowing users or even our consumers to use, that we have to be able to get control of. So with all these opportunities for unmanaged mobile telecommunications costs, it's not hard to see how it's exploding here, as it's been explained in the previous chart. And you're probably asking yourself, I mean, what can we do to make a difference or to start to get a control on this? And because carrier costs are one of the fastest growing line items in an IT budget, I'm going to let Joey talk to you about some thoughts we have or some takeaways that we'd like to share with you related to how you can make a difference in starting to get a handle on the costs related to this exploding telecom industry.
All right. Well,
Joey?
Thanks, Marty. Yeah, thanks, Marty. Anyways, as I mentioned in the previous slide, what with telecom taking up nearly half the IT budget, it represents the best opportunity to find efficiencies and cost savings. Not only because it's the biggest slice of the pie, but also the fact that telecom, as we know it today, is a relatively new field, because smartphones, as we know them, aren't even 10 years old, whereas IT departments have decades of practice and established procedure for managing desktop and laptop computers. We're still working that out with mobile. So there are a lot of opportunities to find savings and to manage these devices. It used to be For telecom, it was just a bunch of landlines completely owned by the organization. That's not the case anymore. We've got corporate liable on one side and individual liable or bring your own devices that are there, which means there's a patchwork quilt of devices and carriers and associated plans. What you need is some way to consolidate these plans into so that you can get so you can negotiate deals with carriers, get more efficiencies, and rearrange plans to match people's usage patterns. You know, are they big talkers? Are they big data users? Let's put these people on the right plans or the right pools so that you're getting the most bang for your buck. As I mentioned earlier, mobility, it's often handed over to IT. They're typically unprepared for it. They treat it as, you know, just a single task they have to do instead of treating it as what it is. It's its own category. And as a result, what happens is you get very little visibility into your inventory of devices, what you're spending, and of course, you don't really have dedicated resources for mobile the way you have for IT. It creates all kinds of problems. There are solutions. There are ways to find these efficiencies, to find better ways of management, and to get visibility into what you're doing and what you're spending on mobile devices. And we'll be talking about that shortly.
Yeah, so Joey, I mean, basically what you're saying is we can get a handle on these rising costs. I think the key is building a solution that brings visibility to what's going on in your environment. And, you know, a number of organizations that we work with today uses an assessment as a tool or a good way to get that visibility and to understand where you are today before you make any changes or get the additional control you need. Once you understand those and understand the touch points, putting the controls in place to manage this rapid change is key. And I often tell organizations it's more than just the cost. You have to look at the life cycle as it relates to mobility to understand where those touch points are so that you can affect change and put in the controls you need to. You need to understand what you're paying for. And with that visibility and an ongoing management structure and solution to do that, you'll find yourself in a much better position than many organizations are in today. And a key to this is also remember you have to continually look at changes. It's inevitable in this space. Plans change, carriers change, devices change, use changes. So the best way to make sure that the changes you make stay for the long term is you need to proactively optimize. That's the key. So if we move to the next slide, I'm going to tell you a little slower, back up one slide, I'm sorry. I'll tell you a little story about an organization that we worked with recently that actually started with, I'm sorry, you were on the correct slide. Move 2 slides. One more, please. Thank you. So the next slide is this slide here. I'm going to tell you a little story about an organization that we worked with recently. And it actually started off as a mobile migration project. And working with this client, it was a couple of thousand devices. They thought there was an opportunity while they were planning on moving from one platform to kind of a choose your own device but corporate liable scenario there might be an opportunity for some other savings. They weren't sure what those savings opportunities were because they didn't have a real good visibility into this particular environment. So what we helped them do in parallel with the migration, and they actually was a part of the planning process, was to actually conduct a telecom expense assessment to evaluate the end user requirements, how devices were being used, the types of plans they have, travel requirements, all of the things that you could expect to be an effect on cost from a mobility perspective. And the great news in this story was, as a part of that, that peek into what was going on, or that assessment, we came up with a set of recommendations that ultimately was going to save them about $500,000 on an annual basis across 2,000 devices. And in many cases, some of these seem obvious, but unfortunately, if not checked or controlled, still become an issue. The optimization areas that we looked at and suggested to the client were around data sharing plans and making sure that the usage was optimized across the different types of plans or existing pools. Adding international plans to the actual process, but also more importantly, being able to have some connectivity across the process of traveling to bring visibility to a travel request and make those changes if need be prior to somebody actually going abroad. Terminating or suspending zero-use devices, I told you earlier on the first polling question some of the challenges related to that, and it's everywhere. And then lastly, right-sizing voice and messaging plans to align with the actual usage. And that's part of, all of these are variables. In other words, it's not something you can just fix once, but you have to change. You have to optimize on a recurring basis to have visibility of the change. So, with that story, what I guess the takeaway here is every organization needs a place to start, either to validate what solution they might have in place today or to begin to identify what solution needs to be put in place to be able to contend with these overwhelming costs and how fast they're growing. So, this is probably a nice lead into our next polling question. So I'd like to turn it back over to Matt, and if we move to the polling question, we'll see what folks have to say about assessments.
Thanks, Marty. So the next polling question we're going to jump into is, what roadblocks are most likely to prevent a full mobility optimization assessment for your organization? Is it budget, timing, resource allocation, or finding a qualified partner? And I got to tell you, Marty, that case study, $500,000 across 2,000 users only goes up exponentially as you start to increase the number of users. So it's certainly hard-pressed not to be able to find a business case and a reason to go look after this.
Yeah, the numbers are definitely there, and I think the biggest mystery around why organizations don't take advantage of that starting point that I'm talking about is when you see the word assessment, organizations, they want to run, right? It either sounds really expensive or it sounds like it's going to take a whole bunch of my staff that, frankly, I just don't have to offer right now because I'm behind in all the things I got to do, or from a timing perspective or time and effort perspective, I mean, it's just exhausting. And I'm hoping what folks will learn here in the next couple of slides that Joey's going to talk about, that there doesn't have to be this mystery, and that this is achievable within all of our lifetime.
Yeah, and as I see the results pop up from this particular survey, you can kind of see we have a tie here between resource allocation and finding the right partner. And coming from the consulting marketplace, I've heard all four of these reasons, but I'm not surprised to see that both allocating the resources to go after the problem and finding a partner who has a consolidated and precise solution that's custom to them are popped up as our top two.
Well, I think it's great. I mean, the resource allocation piece doesn't surprise me because mobility is just moving, mobile use is just moving so quickly. It's hard for any organization to keep up. Finding a qualified partner is refreshing because when you don't have the resources, the time to do this, finding somebody that understands this so you don't have to reinvent the wheel is going to be key to be able to do this quickly.
And to go back to the case study, if you have 2,000 seats and you can find $500,000 savings, the resource allocation is kind of embedded in just going after the problem itself. You could easily find a couple more people to solve this problem and still have pretty good net savings.
Yes, absolutely. Well, this
Could
is
you walk through a
interesting.
little bit on your guys' approach and your solution to this?
Yeah, no, that'd be great. If we go to the next slide, you know, I hope everyone will agree at this point, based on what you're hearing, that a holistic approach is key to not only just getting a handle on the costs, but also to getting in front of some of the things that we're talking about. And I think without this holistic approach, and I talk to folks about mobile lifecycle, and for those of you that are in IT and have been managing PCs and systems for years, the lifecycle in this space is not unlike what you had to contend with on the PC side of the house. So in order to get control over some of these things, you have to start right from the entry point in which mobile use is introduced into your environment. So let's dig a little bit deeper into this approach, and I am confident that if you take this into consideration, that you'll start to realize your desired outcome for mobile use, but more importantly, getting a handle on these costs. So, Joey, would you mind taking us through the approach, please?
Sure, I'd be very happy to, Marty. Well, as Marty said earlier, IT, once upon a time, used to have the one and done problem where they thought that, you know, acquiring the device and then plunking it on a desk was basically it, but no, that's not the case. It's the same deal with mobile devices. There's a whole life cycle to it, and that applies to both company and individual liable devices. From procurement, making sure it's configured properly, getting the apps, making sure people agree to the policies, setting up the device so you know the right thing can be done in the event of it getting misplaced or stolen, repairs, replacement, upgrade. It is a big cycle. So what we have decided to do is we've created a three-step process: assess, transform, and manage. And if we could go to the next slide, I'd be happy to talk about that first step, assess. And like Marty said, assessment sometimes makes people uncomfortable. It reminds them of going to the dentist. But let me tell you right now, it's not like going to the dentist. The idea behind the assessment is to allow us to get a clear snapshot of your present mobile situation, all your accounts, the arrangements you've made with your carrier or carriers, plus getting our hands on all the information your carrier has. And a good chunk of the mobile assessment is simply you providing us with access to your carrier billing portal. That's basically it. Imagine being able to go to the dentist by giving the dentist only a photo of your teeth. That's about as painless as our process is. You give us the access to your carrier billing portal, and what we do is our system then talks to theirs, and it's a combination of computer systems and human telecom experts who access your carrier's billing portals and look at your mobile plans and services and match them to the usage patterns and trends that we see in your records. And we identify things like devices that aren't used at all, plans that are mismatched to people, errors in the carrier's favor, misdelivered plans. Are you getting the services that you negotiated with the carrier? And, of course, identifying potential refunds and credits. And in the end, you get access to our portal, which I'll talk about in a moment, which will allow you to see in a nice single pane of glass one simple view of what your current mobile situation is and where there are efficiencies that you can take advantage of, optimization steps you can take, and basically everything you can do to help make your mobility solution as effective as possible and get you as much bang for the buck. And we're not just going to leave you hanging like that. We will also present to you your savings opportunities. So if we could go to the next slide, please. And this is the transform slide, and this is where I talk about our cloud-based platform, Mobile Manager, which is basically a cloud-based one-stop solution that gives you control and a view into your entire mobility situation. Mobile Manager itself has a bunch of component features, including mobile device management. Lets you enroll and manage devices and the security policies on them. Inventory Manager will give you a total picture of your wireless network and its costs. There's also a financial manager, which lets you view, sort, and track monthly mobility costs all in that single pane of view that we love. There's an analytics feature which lets you analyze costs and spending trends to allow you to make better decisions. Order Manager makes it simple for employees themselves to order devices at their own computer and only order those devices they're approved for. That's going to save your own IT help desk a lot of time. Speaking of help desk, there's also help desk which helps capture and manage employee issues with their mobile devices. And what I'm going to talk about in the next couple of slides in greater detail are invoice processing and audit and optimization. So if we could go to the next slide, please. Invoice processing, it's a very, very important part of staying on top of your mobility dollar. We're talking about things like collecting all your carrier invoices via their billing portals automatically, normalizing those charges, analyzing them for similar services across multiple vendors, and seeing if there are better deals elsewhere. Tracking costs of wireless devices by user, by cost center, by department. You get a complete view into that. Accounts, and of course our system integrates perfectly with your accounts payable process, so wireless cost assignment within your organization is really simple. We also have a bunch of reporting facilities that you can view on our portal, or of course export to whatever data format you'd like. And then finally, of course, for those of you who really want to dive into the numbers and see where they're coming from, Mobile Manager provides a custom on-demand report builder that allows you to do that. Could we have the next slide, please? And then finally, audit and optimization. This is also key. We perform all sorts of tasks, such as doing a rate plan analysis that uses a number of algorithms we have to track usage and trends, and then try and match them to the appropriate plans. We've got a comprehensive audit that ensures that your vendor charges are correct. Are you being charged properly for the equipment? Are you being charged properly for rate plans? The system also, using that comprehensive audit, provides rate plan recommendations. Perhaps you should move these people over to a better rate plan for them, something that's going to give you a little more bang for the buck. And many of these rate plan changes are already automated. You don't really have to lift a finger to do anything. And then finally, there's all sorts of confirmation systems to make sure that we're comparing your baseline spend with your optimized spend. And that's the transform portion, which takes us, next slide please, to the final step, which is management. And this is an ongoing thing. We don't believe in one and done. Like computer security, mobility is actually a process and not just a product. And we're covering all sorts of things, from mobile device management, that's the administration, that's tracking assets, that's making sure that they're secure, configuration and logistics, dealing with the various differences between the platforms, whether it's Android, iOS, Windows, BlackBerry, or what may ever come down the pipe. Configuring the devices so that employees' devices are connecting properly to email, contacts, and calendar, making sure those device settings are correct. Making sure the device encryption is turned on to make sure that your organization's information is secure, and of course kitting and shipping them out, which leads us to deployment and support. That is all sorts of things, including help desk. That is making sure that employees have someone to call or somewhere to go to when their device isn't working, or if they're having difficulty with it. Providing them the opportunity to do some self-help, which is a great time and eventually money saver. Making sure that there is a way to get these devices repaired. And at the end of life, how to get them handed back in and disposed of or recycled properly. And then finally, of course, carrier management, and that covers all sorts of aspects, from ordering the device to activating it to what happens if it's not working. About 2% of devices are, as they say, DOA, dead on arrival. And of course, as I talked about earlier, ongoing plan and usage optimization, making sure that as people's usage patterns change, and as the offerings that carriers have change, the plans that you are subscribed to are adjusted appropriately, so you are spending your telecom dollar appropriately. And that's basically our three-step process right there.
Yeah, so Joey, from a lifecycle perspective, I mean, this is a pretty good view of some of the touch points that we were talking about earlier that potentially have an effect on cost, but also have an effect on desired outcome, and that's why organizations are spending all the money they are today to give people devices and give them access to information and applications anywhere, anytime. And if you don't have these things figured out, you're just not going to get the outcome that you were all hoping to have, or the business value for making the investments in time, money, and effort to get here.
Absolutely.
So,
and
why don't you talk a little bit on the next slide about another study that we've been involved in, and a client that's pretty near and dear to you.
Okay, I'd be happy to. This is a global payment processing organization. If you have not used them, someone you know has. These are people with about 10,000 mobile devices, and their primary goal was to manage their telecom expenses and cut them down. And so what they did was they ended up using our Mobile Manager cloud-based platform to stay on top of their telecom expenses, manage the invoices, and also get a level 2 and 3 mobile help desk. These are more involved help desk. In other words, you know, they might this might require the help person to have administrative access to the device. So we're talking about serious problems. This isn't how do I turn it on or how do I find this app. These are very serious problems. And in the end, of course, they did get their savings. They were getting about $1.25 million per year. You have to remember, you know, about $10 to $15 savings per mobile device per month at 10,000 devices. It really adds up. But they also got other savings and benefits, including the self-service system let them process 1,000 orders a month. And by orders I mean not just getting a new device, but requesting an upgrade, requesting a warranty replacement, accessories, change of plan, anything that requires a change to the mobile device, the self-service system handled, and that's a lot of effort saved that the IT department no longer has to deal with. Also, 750 help desk calls per month. That's quite a bit of time. And they also saved about 20 hours a month not having to deal with carrier bills. That was now automated by the Mobile Manager platform. And they managed to identify, yes, some excess inventory. In other words, we're talking devices that were not used. It's quite a lot of people don't realize how much they're spending on things that are not in use. We've seen it not just in mobile devices, but in the case of another customer, we found that they were using 2 T3. They were spending thousands of dollars a month on 2 T3 lines that they were not using. Can you imagine that? So it's amazing what a good, solid audit will find and the kind of savings you can dig up.
It's all about visibility, right? If you can see
absolutely.
it, fix it.
Yeah, that's right. If you're not monitoring, if you're not measuring it, you can't manage it.
Joey and Marty, I got to tell you, it's coming from a consulting perspective, as someone who tries to match up solutions providers with companies on a daily basis, it's good to see that this market is starting to mature and some real solutions and automation solutions are coming into play. It's been plaguing the industry for quite some time, so it's very, very refreshing to see what you guys are doing.
That's great.
Glad to hear it.
Let's jump
Matt,
into our next.
Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, we'll jump over to our next polling session. So for those of you on the webinar, how would you describe your interest in a comprehensive mobility assessment? A, will you actively seek a mobility assessment? B, you don't currently have the time or the resources to do so? Or C, you're interested, but it's not currently budgeted? We'll pause for a moment while these answers kind of come through. Marty, what are you seeing? I mean, what are the top challenges or reasons why people tend to put this off?
Time and resources. Or another one is the organization thinks they already have a solution in place. They put it in a couple of years ago, and they're feeling pretty comfortable today that things are fine. And unfortunately, hate to be the bearer of bad news, but a number of the assessments we've done recently have found the type of savings that Joey has been talking about, even though they had a solution in place, simply because of the change in the solution and optimization not keeping up with that.
Yeah, this is a whole different market. You look at traditional desktops and the Lifecycle there, and you're talking 3 to 4 years. A lot of people nowadays changing their phones out every 6 months to a year, and the way you deal with those devices is in a completely different fashion.
Sure.
We got some answers coming in here, and it's looking as if most companies are interested, and certainly based on the information that you guys have spoken about today, I'm not shocked to see this answer, but it's not currently budgeted. Look at that 70% number there. Although there are some people who will actively seek that, it's finding the budget and the business justification to do so that's the primary challenge.
Well, I think we have some good news for folks. Especially when it comes to that last one. The top one will actively seek mobility. I'm hoping that the information that we've brought to organizations in this webinar have enlightened them on some of the things that they should consider as a part of this, and that's the reason why they'd like to consider an assessment. So if we move to the next slide, for those of you that 70% that said they didn't have the budget for it, I think I might have an offer for you. And for those of you that have been wonderful in attending this webinar, I hope you all found it was informational. We're offering you a free telecom expense management assessment. And what we'd like to do is I'd like to turn it back over to Matt. He'll talk to you a little bit more about the details related to this assessment.
Yeah,
and how you can get access to it.
Thank you, Marty. So as Marty mentioned in the team, Pomeroy's been kind enough to offer up a free assessment for those of you who attended today's seminar. I want to encourage all of you not to put any delay on today's topic. You'll have an opportunity for a free TEM assessment as well as an opportunity to become a champion of this issue within your organization. So not only is the opportunity big, but the rewards are big. And these guys are really, I think it's a really good opportunity just about for any organization to take advantage of this free opportunity and allow Pomeroy to come in and take a look at this and provide an assessment. You will receive an email just after this seminar. You'll simply need to click on the link in the email and register within 30 days for that free TEM assessment. So please keep an eye open for that email post this seminar. As we wrap up here, what we wanted to do is provide an opportunity also for the audience. We have a couple experts on the phone. Now is an opportunity for us to open up some questions that are specific to your organization or challenges or problems that you run into that haven't been discussed on today's call. And we'll give Marty and Joey an opportunity to chime in on some of those questions. So those of you who can kind of see the question dialog box, you're more than welcome to answer any questions specific to your organization or any challenges or unique circumstances or situations that Marty and Joey have run into. Don't be shy, anyone. Okay. I have a couple that are coming in here. Let's start here. Marty, I'll throw this one at you, and you guys can decide who's best to answer this. So
Sure.
I have a TEM solution in place with an outside provider for a couple of years now. How do I know if there are areas of savings that I've missed?
Sure, that's a great question, and I can't tell you the number of organizations that have asked me that. Frankly, the assessment is the best way to do that. Even though you have a solution in place today, with the plan changes that are going on, with how the maturity of organizations and mobile use moving from traditional use of making phone calls and contacts and calendars to value-based process type work that's being done leveraging mobile devices. You can't afford to assume that the solution that you have in place for a couple of years or a year is keeping up with all of that change. So an assessment is the best way to uncover what areas you may have missed.
Okay. A couple other interesting questions. Next one I'm going to go to is, what percentage of the Gartner projected spend for telecom of that is mobile? Joey or Marty, can you provide the insight to that?
Joey, you want to take a shot at that one?
Let's see now. They did not go into detail about how much of that is mobile, but that's an that's an increasing amount, though. Just judging from the companies that we've been servicing, many people are moving off land, are shifting their budget away from landlines to mobile devices. Particularly, there is another Gartner survey that says that by 2017, half of all businesses in the U.S. will be on some kind of BYOD program, and that's where they're going to be shifting a good chunk of their expenses, just managing these devices that employees bring themselves.
Okay. I think the other thing that's going to drive more to mobility is I've seen predictions here by the analysts that by 2015, mobile use is going to surpass PC use. So when we talk about that, you're talking about moving from laptops, for example, to tablets, and tablets are on cellular networks. We're starting to see a large portion of that change over today. I just got done working with a large agency in Pennsylvania that's proposing to migrate off of all of their desktop and laptop computers to tablet-based PCs, and it's about 7,000 devices. So I would expect to see a number of organizations that follow suit, and so that telecom expense piece is going to only get larger as it relates to mobile.
Yes, and especially as cellular networking moves to LTE, you're going to find that, you know what, more bandwidth tends to drive more usage. That's the way it worked. That's the way it worked with wired internet, and it seems to be going that way with wireless internet as well.
All right.
Sure.
I'm going to try and get two questions with one stone here, if you will. We're having a request to jump back to the slide that was just before the second polling question. So David, if you could possibly jump back to that slide, and I will jump into the question just after that. So Marty, our
case study?
Let me take a look. It would be the one right before the second polling question. So I believe that would have been the case study. That's correct.
That is the first case study.
You got it. So while we're backing up to that, let me jump into another question that's come in. Are companies opting for a fixed stipend per user mobility, where users manage a lot of their mobility expenses themselves? Is that the direction you guys are seeing this head, Marty?
There's a mix, okay, and that goes kind of with the whole BYOD scenario. Organizations, as I mentioned earlier, are still trying to figure out from a risk-value perspective where bring your own is the right answer, because shifting those expenses typically, in a user's eyes, shifts responsibility. And if you're deploying applications and making data available from a use case perspective with an anticipated outcome, you need to ensure availability, and moving too much responsibility over to the user minimizes the amount of control the organization has to ensure the outcome that you're expecting to get in that particular use case. So it's kind of a mixed scenario. Organizations are typically allowing the user to choose their own device. In some cases, they're providing a stipend or some kind of an allowance related to that. But I see very few organizations moving the full burden over to the user at this point.
Okay. And a question around if you guys provide opportunities in landline service as well, or is this strictly for mobility?
Joey, you want to take that one?
Absolutely, yes. We also have in the GSG Cloud another product called Wireline Manager, and that's specifically designed to optimize landline expenses. It uses a good number of the same algorithms that Mobile Manager does. It's just particularly geared towards what we call wireline, what you might call landline. But yeah, we do have a product for that.
Okay, very good. How long would the assessment take? I think we're having some people wonder.
Sure. The average assessment takes about 2 weeks. It's a minimal amount of time on the client's behalf. It takes maybe an hour, 2 hours max of a client's time to just provide us or give us access to the information that we need to analyze. And then from there we can pretty quickly turn around the results and hopefully save you on average $10 per device per month.
What is the main challenge or risk in the TM solution implementation, and how long does it actually take to implement that solution typically?
From an implementation standpoint, obviously that varies based on what portions of the solution you're interested in. If let's just assume at this point that you're interested in invoice management and optimization, asset control, that kind of stuff. That would take typically about 45 to 60 days to implement. And the biggest challenge, frankly, is the more carriers, it takes just a little bit longer to get the proper documentation in place related to allowing us to help organizations get rid of that inconsistency or inefficiency that exists across multiple carriers. But that's probably about the biggest challenge.
Another good question that I have coming through here is what advantages can you provide in an entirely BYOD environment? If users own and manage their own devices and plans, does the solution provide any advantages?
Total BYOD. Boy, I wish I had the crystal ball on that one. That's why organizations are still working on that. I think it boils down to a use case. Any one of these is a risk-value thought process that has to be gone through. And again, back to what I had mentioned before, the more you release to somebody else, the lower amount of, or the least control that you have over the situation. So you need to take a hard look at what the use case is, what your desired outcomes are, and from there you can make determinations on ownership models, the right to use, the type of SLAs that you need to have in place to ensure that availability piece that I talk about, that's more than just about a device. It's all of the components that allow you to perform a function or a process in leveraging the technology.
Okay. And another interesting question, I would suspect that different companies with different footprints vary widely in both the total telecom cost as well as the apportionment between mobile and other devices. The question based on Pomeroy's experience for primarily a domestic organization with a moderate mobile workforce, what portion of total telecom is typically mobile?
You know, Joey, do you want to take a shot at that based on some of the statistics that you've seen from a number of the companies that are using Mobile Manager?
Little hard to nail down, but from my own consulting experience, we're talking to at this point from easily one third to a half, and this is me being conservative right now. It's just that these days there is a workforce on the go, and there are a number of organizations. There is a food manufacturer who I've worked with recently who are actually providing tablets and smartphones as perks, as employee perks, as rewards or as ways to attract employees. So easily a third to a half, probably more, and this is just me being conservative.
Okay. Couple more questions I'll try and squeeze in before our time ends here.
Sure.
What is the typical percentage of savings that you see?
It's about $10 per user per device, or per device per month.
Okay.
And again, that varies between organizations that have solutions in place and organizations that don't. Obviously, the ones that don't and are growing in the mobile use category are the ones we see the greatest amount of savings.
And I'm going to do one last question here, and for those of you who post questions that we're unable to answer, I apologize, we're running out of time here, but will the slides in the presentation be made available to the attendees?
Yes, they will.
I think the answer to that one is absolutely.
All right. In the interest of time here, I think we got about another minute to wrap up. I'd like to once again thank both Pomeroy as well as the Outsourcing Institute for providing both the experts and the talking points for today's discussion. I'd like to re-emphasize our earlier point that a free telecom expense management assessment is available to everyone who attended today's webinar. So please see your follow-up email for the instructions on how to go about registering for that. And we look forward to working with you and Pomeroy at going after such a large problem and helping you guys find the solutions for it. Thanks, everyone, for joining today.
It's great. Thank you.